Hi, everyone. My name is Bakarin Schultz, and I work for Ipsos, which is a large global research company. And one of the things that we do is help test and develop creative and make sure that it is as effective as it can possibly be. I have worked for 3 advertising agencies, as well as this is my 3rd research agency. So I've got a little bit of experience in doing a lot of what we are going to be talking about as we continue you down the path of getting your certificate in marketing, optimization and insights, and informing creative development specifically. So let me just share my screen and then we can talk about where we're going to focus in today. As a reminder, what you're going to walk away from this certificate with is the ability to really be able to apply that consumer-centric approach that we're trying to bring to developing and optimizing all marketing activities. You're going to be able to move from identifying business goals and strategies and objectives to be able to help develop specific protocols in order to help drive for that relevant marketing and advertising. You're going to be able to help assess the requirements of effective marketing and advertising plans to support the right business goals. You're also going to be able to develop actionable insights that you're going to pull from consumer and market data. You're going to be able to integrate that research and insights process into the development and testing and optimization of your organization's messaging and creative assets. You're going to definitely be able to help evaluate how media choices, the media mix, and the kind of optimal media plans will both be needed and also impact your ability to reach your marketing, communication, and business goals. You're going to be able to measure the effectiveness and efficiency of a marketing campaign and also determine some appropriate optimizations. And you're also going to meet a lot of people in the industry along the way. How this fits into the overall certificate. As a reminder, this course is really building on the back of the foundations course and all of the preceding electives that you've had before it, and it's going to reinforce all the benefits of that consumer first approach that we've been talking about across all of the courses in this program. What are you going to walk away from this specific course with? Well, the ability to justify the research or the role of research throughout the creative development process. And I guarantee that's actually something that you are going to have to be able to do throughout your career if this is the path that you're going to pursue. You're going to be able to recommend the research approaches that will really inform the balance between the rational and the emotional performance versus brand building creative campaigns within, I should say, performance advertising. You are going to be able to design and recommend the appropriate research plan that's going to support the creative platform that you will be a part of helping design. You're going to be able to integrate the insight inputs into a very impactful creative brief that is going to assist in generating that creative campaign platform. And you're going to be able to recommend the appropriate research tools, of which there are a lot, and you're learning about here, especially in this week's module. And you're also going to be able to create a very story-driven analysis of those research insights and recommendations that you're going to make for a creative campaign. Finally, you'll be able to lead the effective conversations and brief meetings that are really needed to be able to help move everything throughout all of your stakeholders throughout your creative development journey. And it is a journey. This module specifically includes the following mini lectures. You will have already watched When and Why to test creative assets in the portfolio that you're developing. And also this specific module is to focus you in on creative testing, research methodologies, and applications. By the end of this module in week 6, you are going to be able to differentiate between different creative asset testing approaches and tools, as well as recommend the appropriate testing plan for the cross-channel creative campaign that you will be a part of. So let's talk specifically about creative testing. Creative testing is the way that we talk about creative research. Again, I talked in the last module or the last presentation that you watched, we talked about it being sort of a pressure test. It's not shouldn't be a pass or fail test. It's really just a handle for the way that we talk about a test of the efficacy of the creative, either before or while you have it in market, really so that you can make sure that you're going to be able to predict that you're going to reach all of your goals. So this is you at your computer and your boss sends you an email saying, we need to do some creative testing. So where do you start? If you don't sort of already have a framework for how you want to work, if this is indeed the place that you are going to lean in your career, it's going to feel a bit complicated and sort of big and hairy. So when you are developing the creative testing research plan, and if you want to, you can just call it creative research. Uh, when you are developing it, there's going to be a bunch of considerations that you're going to want to have at the touch of your fingers in order to really be able to think about how you develop it. Because after all, there really is no right or wrong way to do this. It really just has to have somebody driving it who really has strong rationale for how a certain research plan is going to serve the business situation that you're involved in. So really starting with a checklist, I have found throughout my career that it's important to sort of have a true and tested approach for yourself to be able to say, well, what are we starting with in order for me to make sure that I'm driving the right plan? So let's talk about just a quick checklist that you can use if this is helpful for you. You want to really be able to ask yourself, what is the maturity of the campaign that I'm involved in? And after I give you this checklist, I'm going to take you through a greater level of detail for each. So again, maturity of campaign. Well, where is my team in their stage of creative development? What is the media plan that they are working to create creative to serve? What are the stakeholders that I'll be working with in my organization? Who are they as people, and how does the organization itself really think about this process? And also, what are my budgets and what are my timelines? So let's go through each one a little bit more in detail. Let's talk about how you're thinking about new or existing creative, and what are the kinds of implications that come from how mature or not mature the campaign is that you're helping develop. So these are the kinds of questions you can ask yourself. Am I developing a new campaign and I just need to help my team decide between multiple directions? Or are you really helping evolve a campaign that's already been on air for quite a bit of time? And depending on how you answer that, there's going to be some implications for how you move forward. If you're evolving an existing campaign, you can really just decide that you're going to focus your research plan on kind of testing just one execution. The more mature your campaign, if you were working on Coca-Cola, it's funny how much we rely upon thinking about a super mature brand like Coca-Cola, who has had creative out there for almost centuries. We can think about the fact that we can rely upon all kinds of data that we have on hand and intuition and all of the things that we know to be true about our brand over the course of time. You really can develop, or you really can test less executions in that situation. But if you're developing a brand new campaign, you really are going to have to be thinking about how many different approaches do we have, and let's make sure that we can help narrow it down, not based on subjectivity, but objectivity. You want to be very objective in that kind of situation and not bring all those things that you are predisposed to believe about your brand. So more mature, less executions, less mature, probably more executions, especially if you're going to be bringing it to life across different channels. Let's also think about, are you adding a new media channel to your brand plan, or is this just kind of a simple evolution of that mature campaign that just needs some refreshing? The implications about wherever you are in that is, if you're adding an additional channel, you really probably do need to be able to test the creative, because if you've never operated in a digital platform, or you've for some reason never put an outdoor board up, you're really going to be able to, or need to, pressure test how your communication works within either a much richer media channel or sort of a more limited, static kind of environment. Also, if you really do have a mature campaign and you're just adding a channel, we do need to think about what kind of methodology, what organization, what partner have you had in the mix? Because you will want to think about, what do I already have on hand that needs to be used as a comparison point? I want to make sure that I have the ability to read those same kind of KPIs and make sure that we're talking in the same language that we've established. If you're really just kind of refreshing a campaign, you definitely want to be able to just figure out how to test those new executions. And also probably really better to be able to use the same methodology, because the less variables you have to present to your stakeholders, probably the better to keep everybody focused. It's really important for you to think about what stage you're in. So if you are in the stage of creative development, uh, and you're thinking about exactly where you're at, well, where is the creative team in their process of developing? Because the earlier the stage, the more you're going to lean on qualitative methodologies, quite likely. Really, this is the stage where people want to be able to see and think and feel in tandem to what they're hearing from people in a live sort of setting. Let's think about, do you already have an approved big idea? Do you already know that you're moving into kind of a storyboard situation, and just bringing it to life? Or are you going to be thinking about having shot the commercial and being really ready to run once you have that green light? Um, Depending on where you're at in that, the later the stage, the more you're likely going to lean on quantitative methodologies. Really, you're probably going to be working with a lot of research suppliers at this point who specialize in creative testing, who have developed those methodologies that are very specific to each stage of creative development. So depending on if you're at storyboard versus full up production, you're likely going to be using the supplier who has the skills and the capabilities to be able to read you exactly where you're at. Let's think about the media plan right now. Are you already going to be developing a 360-degree campaign, or are you really focusing on just one medium, like digital or network television? The implication around the kind of breadth of the media plan is really that a lot of marketers that you will work with, either if you are in the marketing organization or if you are working as a very specialized researcher coming in, you're probably going to find that a shortcut that a lot of these marketers would like to take is to be able to just test the creative in just one media channel and then assume that, well, if it worked in one channel, it's going to work across all of the media channels. Um, it's really important for us to understand that that's not an assumption that you can just make. However, you might not have the budget to be able to test everything in every channel. So probably you're going to want to think about, where are the biggest, riskiest bets, and where will people see most of my creative? Where can I predict that more eyeballs are going to spend their time, and how much money is it going to take to get us there? Because usually it is the television or the film. If you think about it, it is a lot more expensive to produce, and it takes a lot more technical acumen to produce a full up feature film than it does a print ad. So it's just easier to be able to think about, where are people going to spend time most likely with my brand, and where is it going to be the most time and resource intense to get. Also, do you really need for the organization to get a read on just one execution, or do you need to make sure that that entire campaign is working cohesively? So is it important to you to figure out, is the television working, or is it important for you to think the campaign is working? The implications of that are really that the larger the media budget, the more important it is really going to be to understand, how are all those channels working on their own, and how are they sort of cross-pollinating and working in conjunction with each other across the entire media plan, to be able to figure out what synergies are you getting by having people spend time, again, with just one execution, or do we know that we predict with our media budget they're going to spend time with the entire campaign? This is going to be the one where it's going to take a little bit more of your EQ to come in and help us understand how to manage the people, the personalities, and the professions that will be in the room. Who are your organization stakeholders? There are some people in some organizations that are going to be incredibly data hungry and really want a lot of rigor. And there are those that are going to be more based on making decisions based on intuition. So again, it might sound odd, but just think about who are my stakeholders? What are the types of personalities? What are the things that we know that they need in order to make decisions? Again, data hungry or sort of more of like a gut check situation. When you design the research plan and you've thought through those things, you really need to make sure that you're managing all of your stakeholders to help them understand, here is the plan, here's what you're going to get, here's how I'm going to help you make decisions. It's just going to be important to check off the box. Do I have everybody aligned so that I don't get into that meeting months down the line and have them say, I did not know that we were making decisions based on just a gut check, or where is the gut check coming in so that I can see how human beings see how they're actually going to react to my creative. Um, Again, do they want in the organization to be able to actually see people react to the creative and use their more of a human approach to hear how people react to that and how they're processing it? Or do they really want that hard data that they can use in meetings to be able to compare across time and also across a media plan? I really also want to make sure that you know that you might find yourself in an organization where it's just really important for people to say, I want to see how human beings are reacting to this. And I would like to be able to kind of unsee it, or I'm sorry, see it unfold before my eyes rather than just having you bring me in a report that is all based on data. Again, you're really going to need to think about, is this an organization that will be satisfied by just one, or is it a combination? Once we've gotten done thinking about our stakeholders, the next thing that is very helpful to think through are well, how much and how long do I have? Your budgets and your timelines. Believe it or not, it's not going to be as easy to get this answer as you think it is. It really is, but it is important for you to start with, do people in my organization or my client, depending on where you sit in this whole ecosystem, is there an agreed to budget? Does the team already have an expectation of what this is going to cost? Or is it your job to start by bringing them ballparks, which I have found is far more often the case than you think it will be? Is it your job to figure out what is a ballpark for an efficient creative testing plan, depending on all of the things that people want you to bring as a researcher? The budget is really very not or very reliably not going to be open-ended. So the amount is no doubt really going to have an impact on you as a researcher, on your options and your choices. And it really is not going to be uncommon for you to have to figure out how to negotiate. What are those compromises and those trade-offs in your research plan based on that? Another thing that you're going to want to think about is, well, what are these research results going to feed into in the next stage of the creative development process? Depending on uh, depending on really where you are in the process and what people want, the deadline is likely going to have a very significant impact on those options and those choices of those methodologies. And you're just going to have to help people make a choice. If the deadline is really going to hinder you, you're going to have to help them understand how the available options really will help you make those decisions with sometimes the bare minimum information, depending on where you are at in all of these variables. Also, what is the ultimate deadline you need to design your plan to? Sometimes it will shock you after thinking that you just need to sit down and create the perfect plan, that somebody will say, that's great, but that's a 6-month plan, and we've got exactly 4 weeks. Hopefully you have more time than that, but that is something that you will want to think about. How much time do you really have to design this plan for? So again, beyond your methodological choices, you're going to have to think about the timeline and also think about, well, how much analysis can I really perform at each stage? Sometimes the methodology will be too rich for you because you won't even be able to tap into sort of the bare minimum of what it will offer you. Or sometimes you just have to think about, how do I elevate some of the diagnostics to come into play much quicker? So you need to be able to think about your research plan. How much time will I have, not just to choose the methodology, but also to make sure that I have an approach figured out to be able to bring as much of the data to the surface as possible. Let's now think about, we talked some about qualitative and quantitative, but now I really want to focus you on what qualitative is going to be good for in your plan. So there's going to be a lot of time in your organization where people will want to be able to ask people directly, why do you think that is or is not, fill in the blank with you? Um, Qualitative is really going to be good at both ends of the research, and I'll show you where quantitative fits in, but qualitative it tends to be one of those things that you can design really well, as long as you know it's important for me to be able to talk to people and to show my organization where people, how they are reacting right in front of them. Uh, Again, there are just times in an organization where people just really want to hear from people, and it doesn't matter how data driven the organization can be. It will be important for them to have a point in time when they just want to see how people react. So the kind of stimulus, the earlier we are in this process, typical stimulus can be rough concepts, it could be scripts, it could be storyboards, it could be ripomatics, and we'll talk at another point in time about really what a ripomatic is versus an animatic, but just it is a moving piece of film that is usually borrowed from either popular movies or stock footage, but it's really kind of using previously recorded images to sort of rip from different kinds of film and put together something that can represent your idea. Later in the process, the typical kind of stimulus that you will use are more closer to finished advertisements, and also perhaps final finish or final and produced advertising. When we think about qualitative, and again, we just talked about the fact that it's good at both ends and also what the different kind of stimulus is. What it is really a research methodology that helps us gather those insights and feedback on campaigns through non-numerical data. So it's more being able to uh, capture insights from a qualitative sort of read, and being able to help understand qualitatively, not quantitatively, but qualitatively, how something is going to impact a brand and be successful or need some work. This can really be done in a lot of different ways, including in person, or especially now pre or post COVID, really online virtual focus groups, workshops, online chats, and video interviews. It can be written or it can be live. It can be synchronous, where you have everybody together at one time, or it can be asynchronous, where people can come in at their own time as long as it is by the deadline that you need it. This is really a way that aims at exploring consumers' thoughts and feelings and attitudes, especially in their own words, and also really helps us get those valuable insights that will help us improve the campaign. And it's really more frequently used when advertising is still in that development process, really in the stage of, this is what we're going to go spend a lot of money and time bringing to life, and we want to make sure that people say, yeah, that sounds like or looks like a really good idea. And if it doesn't, why not? Let's make sure that we try to keep the idea alive until we know for sure that it's the idea itself, not the execution, that's hindering our performance. The pros is that it's fast, it can be iterative, meaning you can go back and forth, doesn't have to just be one hit. That you can make sure that you also have an iterative process within that moment, so that you can get the moderator to ask questions that are coming to the surface based on something that your stakeholders are hearing at that time. And we can ask people, well, wait a second, that gives me a new question. Can you also help me understand this? That also leads to, it can get your cross-functional team together, which can be really rare, where people are sitting together thinking through a problem. So really collaborating and share in real time and sharing the decision-making process can be very valuable to building a team. And again, helps the team see and feel when they're watching and listening to people reacting. The cons, regardless of how many caveats you give to people throughout this process, a lot of stakeholders will hear what they want to hear and will latch on to that decision, and they will not be swayed. You can't convince them that they didn't hear or see what it is they believe they heard or saw. It can be really challenging to conduct qualitative across numerous audiences. So sometimes if you say, I want to talk to people 18 to 24, well, an 18-year-old is very different in their development to 24-year-olds. Now, if it's not just age, if it's socioeconomics, if it's race, if it's orientation, if it is region across the country, you've got a lot of moving parts to figure out, how can I talk to, in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable budget, all of these different people. Let's talk about quantitative. Quantitative is really good when you want to have an empirical data source to help guide your creative development. This tends to be better at the later stages of creative development, even though organizations are very quickly adapting and figuring out how to bring more quantitative rigor to the beginning. But you will find that it's usually dependent on the quantitative data will be something that people will bring into their expectations for a later stage of development. We're really finding that organizations, especially in today's world, they are super data hungry, and they really want to have data driving some of those decisions in order to predict the performance of something. Later stage quantitative typically has stimulus that includes animatics, a moving film that is usually animated, illustrated. And we saw that in the last presentation about what an animation or an animatic looks like before you actually go shoot something. We can also have rough cuts. So that first cut that comes out of the editor's office, and we can see how it looks at a rough stage before all of the final production dollars have been spent on some of the finishing touches. Also, very close to finished ads of any medium, doesn't matter. It can just be sort of, it can look like what it is going to be at the later stage. Also, what we find as a really easy way to think about this is that it's typically respondents are exposed to advertising and then ask questions about it in an online survey. That's most likely the way that you're going to get your quantitative surveys fulfilled. It's really better in this process to have concepts that really do look and feel more finished, so that people can spend less time imagining what those things might look like, but really what they truly intend to be, so you can focus people on that intended experience. Usually requires about 150 people or more in your segments. It just depends on how your clients and your organization thinks about base size and sample size of those surveys to be statistically significant within a certain confidence range. These surveys really tend to be about 10 to 20 minutes in length, depending on how many different kinds of insights or different kinds of KPIs and diagnostics you really need in order to bring the insights that are worthy of the business issue. Some research companies do have a qualitative and quant methodology blend, so you'll want to be able to think about that. Is there a way to very quickly marry the two in order to have some data and also some really good qualitative interviews to help us understand the why behind the what? In addition to all these traditional research companies, there's all these DIY platforms. I tend to find that most clients do not want to become experts in a methodology, but sometimes there are DIY platforms that make it easy to just get a quick hit of research, and as the researcher within an organization, really bring enough understanding to be able to really make sense of all that they're seeing and bring the right kinds of recommendations. The pros of all of this in the quantitative world are the ability to leverage a normative database in order to be able to drive decisions within large data sets. especially if a concept is really going to be expensive to bring to life, makes people feel more confident that they brought the right amount of rigor to that situation. It also can create a very stable learning environment to help track all of your ideas over time and to bring in experts who use this data day in and day out so that you're not having to learn everything along the way, and it holds people accountable to become really good at using the methodology. This really can be a great way to help you winnow down a large number of concepts and ideas and all kinds of creative assets across all kinds of campaign channel or creative channels in order to just progress those really strong ideas. The cons, it can be incredibly costly depending on the sample sizes, and also the amount of stimuli that you want to test. So thinking about costs in this specific methodology are really important. These sort of testing systems that we've talked about can be really seen as black box to the creative team, and it can be really frustrating to get them to understand the insights, not the data, but the insights with which they need to actually improve their creative. It can really bring a lot of tension to the situation if you don't have the right people in there to be able to diffuse that tension and get them to focus on not this mysterious black box, but sort of the direction that the data will take them in. Also, if you find that your organization wants to use this as a pass fail test, without mining everything for insights, it can really prematurely kill potentially very effective ideas. So there's a lot of famous stories about advertising that went into quantitative testing and was recommended by a researcher to ditch that idea to start over. And somebody had a hunch. Yeah, I think this is going to work, and it can produce some incredible, or it can really hold back some incredible ideas if it's not really researched in the right way with the right people at the helm. Let's talk about benchmarks and norms within quantitative. This is really important to understand what is at the foundation of helping us compare across different kinds of creative, uh, how something is performing within context of history. So what are norms? Well, norms and databases are really the thing that quantitative uses in order to provide confidence that we are looking at the right data and using them in the right way to be able to predict performance. I really like to think about it as a yardstick or kind of a ruler to be able to measure the creative performance. Norms are really just benchmarks based on all those previously tested ads and their performance. So for any particular metric, let's think about message takeaway and how it compares to all the other ads that are tested. Let's think about message takeaway. Is the test ad really in the top 50% of all ads tested? And how can we help boost it with the right insights to help it get more in the top 30%? So if it is in the top 30%, what do our suppliers and their norms tell us that kind of performer, how are they predicting that will impact your brand's abilities? Also, is it in the top 10% of all test ads? Again, this is how we know where we sort of fall in comparison to our predecessors, both within our organization and also within the category or just in the medium that we're using. Um, there are a number of specific criteria that help us to be able to understand how we can perform against ourselves, or also all the ads tested. We can think about whether or not it was all, just as an example, all dishwashing liquid, all courier services, all beer. Do we want to test it against just ads from a specific brand? And this is a way that we can develop the norms in order to make sure that we're comparing it to the right set of competitors. You really probably aren't going to want to think about how am I, if I'm working in a category like beer, how am I motivating a purchase versus somebody who is going to be driving the need to motivate for a purchase of a car? Those are two very different decision sets. Creative will impact in a very different way. It's less likely that somebody will leave the experience of an ad to be able to just go straight to purchasing a car than if I want to remind somebody, hey, for Memorial Day weekend or for Halloween, for any holiday, here is the next thing that you want to add to your shopping list in order to be able to make sure that you're having the best experience possible. Let's also think about the brand. Again, Pepsi and Coke will have two different proprietary norm databases of their own to supply the kind of benchmark that will help them understand, in comparison to our own performance, where are our expectations about performing as a brand compared to a disruptor who's just entering the category. And that leads me to, is it a brand new product? Because that will have a different set of norms and a different set of competitive points in time and also in media. We will hold that accountable in a different way than we would a very, very mature brand or a very mature product. And again, make sure that you're also finding a way to think about how the ads in your category perform similarly or different across other categories. Norms really do need to be managed very well in order to provide confidence in your measurements. We need to make sure that this kind of a yardstick, this way of providing a measurement system is based on 4 core pillars, which will be really important to helping you manage the integrity of that normative database that you want to depend on. The first thing is, let's think about media and finish specific. Norms are going to be very specifically developed across a variety of touch points, formats, and also a level of finish in order to make sure that you have the most meaningful comparison points. So again, the kind of media and the kind of finish will be very important to think about that normative database that you're looking at. You also want to make sure that it's appropriately contextual. It should have a point of view as to whether they need to be adjusted based on the brand size and the category in which it plays. And usually that is going to be true. And you want to make sure that you have a point of view on this as well as the supplier who's giving them to you. You want to make sure that they are contemporaneous. Do not compare yourself to an advertisement from 1950. That is very different than the peers in which you are competing right now. You want to make sure that this normative database is looked at as a living organism. The living organism that competes today is very different than that of eons ago. You also want to make sure that it is very relevant, and that is only going to be brought to you by having those really up-to-date comparison points. Make sure that they're really robust, because these databases have such an impact on your organization and your creative. You want to make sure that you understand how culturally it's taking into account the nuance that's brought by different cultures and the place in time and the place in the world and the place in a generation that you are actually trying to have impact. To persuade my father to do something is very different than how you might want to persuade or appeal to Generation Z. But you also will work on products and brands that also have a much broader reach across history and time, so that will also be different. But you want to make sure that these comparison points take into account all of those things. So be very robust in your point of view and how you interrogate the norms in the database that you'll be using. Different media will also have very different jobs. Today's media landscape is highly fragmented and very different than the one that I grew up with versus the one that my parents grew up with. We also can see how continuously these media channels are really at the speed of light evolving. And so we want to make sure that each of these channels and media, even as fantastic as it is, that we have so many things to bring our brand to life. We want to make sure how the opportunities are really unique for communication. Each channel and media is going to bring you a very different kind of context, which will give all of the advertising a very different job. So if you think about broadcast media, and again, this is very different. When I grew up, there really was just television. Now or television and radio. But now there's all kinds of audio marketing and podcasts and all kinds of things that help people associate within music and movies, and anything that can be broadcast is an opportunity for us to have a different job for our advertising. When we think about the print media, We have newspapers, magazines, books, signs, and billboards, and endless other different kinds of printed media that are coming to life every day. When we think about digital, we have websites, apps, email, podcasts, smartphones, streaming video, blogs, wikis, ebooks, RSS feeds, social networks, and streaming music. And by the time I'm done recording this, we are going to see that there's a lot of other media channels that will have already come to life. Okay, so beyond the crazy fragmented landscape of media, let's now think about the context with which these different channels and all the different things that come from the media plan need to be considered when you're choosing that research methodology. Okay, when I was growing up, and it wasn't all that long ago, that you thought about a commercial and it was broadcast on a television. That was how all producers, all creatives, all clients thought about when I am producing a commercial, it lives on television. And then we started to see things be broadcast within the context of a different experience. And that was on a laptop or a PC. And then came something like a tablet, an iPad, an Amazon Kindle. Uh, then next thing you know, we had smartphones. But we didn't just have smartphones. We had smartphones that brought us different experiences like social media platforms and different kinds of sort of broadcast environments where people could pick their own entertainment and potentially be forced to watch a commercial or to be able to skip it. And so different levels of behavior and different levels of control, and also different sizes of screens. All of these things make a dramatic difference when you're thinking about what you are producing and therefore how you are measuring it and figuring out how to predict if something's going to work. So we have to think about all these evolving contexts in order to make sure we understand how effective an ad can be or will be. We would never expect an outdoor billboard as somebody's driving down the highway to have the same job as a television commercial that needs to have the stopping power within the Super Bowl or with any other kind of video platform. So we can't expect that just one research methodology will be able to capture everything at all times with all media. We need to be able to think about the context of the media platform and therefore how do we measure it within a research environment. Some researchers have developed methodologies that really take all of that context into account, and that can be incredibly helpful if they have the right ability to be able to show you how their norms and the context with which they actually research will bring you another unique and more informed data point. Um, Data has really shown that the same assets really do perform differently across different devices and contexts. Uh, Thinking about your own behavior, if you're on Instagram, does that ad that stops you in your tracks from scrolling, does that have a very different job for the brand? And do you notice something that's very different than when you are sitting back and more watching live television within the context of a broadcaster who doesn't give you the control over your own environment? So if you really do have a lot of diverse channels across your media plan, you're going to think about whether or not you need a context specific approach. Personally, my opinion is that you should at least have a very strong point of view and talk to your research partners and your stakeholders about what their perspective is to make sure you're all on the same page. Now let's talk about neuroscience. One of the primary use cases for neuroscience is within creative testing, and we sort of touched on it, but we haven't really dived into it. This has really been emerging, especially over the course of my career when I first came in, both on creative side and also in research. There was no measure and there was no mention of how neuroscience specifically would come into this. But then people started talking about system 1 and system 2. It was absolutely the rage for the past decade. It's quieting down a little bit now, but especially when you talk to people about system 1 and system 2, you will want to know that neuroscience tends to be the way that we measure those kinds of reactions, because people often can't really report to us how they are making choices within their system 1 thinking, which is that fast way that you make decisions, and you can't really explain why. Why do you believe that? I haven't thought about that for years. Why are you reacting that way? I don't exactly know, but neuroscience tends to be the thing that we lean upon. So let's talk about the different kinds of creative testing methods that really embody neuroscience. There's EEG, which is really these sensors that are sort of put across people's, it's usually a cap, and you can sense um, different measures of emotional motivation, memory activation, and also attention shifting. And that is really through these sensors that help us predict or help us read what it is that different parts of the brain are actually doing at the time of being exposed to a piece of stimulus. There's also a set of core biometrics, which is also helping us tend to look at heartbeats and skin galvanization, all of these things that really help us to understand how the body is also being able or reacting to an experiment or to an experience. We also have facial coding. Facial coding came about, actually, there is a software development that helped people be able to read autistic respondents or autistic people's emotions that often we can't read. And often the person who is autistic can't read of other people. And facial coding, through the use of software, is able to help us identify a super minor amount of expression on a person's face, where somebody might show a great deal of surprise or joy. Sometimes those kinds of muscles in somebody's face are very hard to read, very hard to pick up. We can pick up with this kind of software in research on advertising to be able to understand how people are reacting. Just like if somebody who can't read another person, this software can help them identify, oh, this person is reacting with anger or surprise, uh, not something like joy. So it is a great diagnostic to be able to help us understand how somebody is reacting, and not having to depend on them being able to tell us, because we can actually see it and measure it. Eye tracking. Well, where are people looking when they're looking, or when you think that they're looking at something within your advertisement? Where are they spending time? If you have a lot going on the screen, and you want to know if your brand is being observed, maybe the brand has a central role within one scene, but you've got a lot going on. Let's say there's a whole bunch of animals and babies on screen, and your brand is in one part of the screen, and you find out through eye tracking they're actually not looking at where you think they're looking. They're going to be looking at something else that is stealing their attention. That can be a great diagnostic to be able to help us figure out how people will consume your advertising, and you can start to make revisions based on ways to simplify what's going on screen, so that you can get people to more naturally focus on the thing rather than a thing. When we think about the predictive nature of these things, EEG, biometrics, and facial coding are far more predictive of how something will actually perform, and something like eye tracking is far more often just a diagnostic. So let's again think about whether or not you need to be predictive or diagnostic in the way that you are researching your creative's capability. So one of the debates is whether or not we use neuroscience on its own. And there are a lot of companies out there who will have methodologies that only use neuroscience. But it really, across many organizations, have finally figured out that neuroscience is probably more often to be used in combination with other survey methods. Again, lots of companies out there who will just focus on neuroscience, but probably best in combination. You remember that we discussed the three branches of neuroscience in the foundations course. Those were neurometrics, biometrics, and psychometrics. When we think about creative testing or creative research, some techniques are really more often used than others. And that creative testing or the creative research really tends to most often use eye tracking, which is a biometric, facial coding, which is a biometric, and then implicit association tests, which is all about psychometrics. And really, to a much lesser extent, is heart rate, which is about biometrics, and the galvanic skin response, which is also biometrics. But today, it's really most often used to be uh, in tandem with more of the traditional survey methods. And it really is an area of practice to be able to understand when and where to bring these things in. And I would really recommend that you spend some time figuring out how you want to use neuroscience, but I would recommend that you really spend a lot of time thinking about how it is best as a complement rather than a replacement. So now let's talk about artificial intelligence in the realm of creative testing or creative research. There's absolutely no way that you are watching anything on the news these days and not being exposed to artificial intelligence. It is absolutely something that is starting to be developed. Probably by the time of you're done watching this, you will see that AI has yet another component to it that we didn't know about yesterday. Um, Really, some research firms are starting to develop methods or tools that will train machines to be able to predict, and it's often within hours or minutes rather than weeks or months. They're trained to predict how human beings might react to advertising. But it is trained based on, because there really is nothing in artificial intelligence right now that isn't about being trained on and then predicting what would be the most human reaction or behavior based on past history. So we really need to make sure that we also remember that it's at the nascent stage within creative research. It is just at the dawn, and I'm sure that in another decade, it is going to be wild and crazy as to how much it has advanced. But we really need to make sure at this point in time that we have some methods to interrogate and some questions to interrogate researchers. What is your artificial intelligence really based on? So let's think about 5 core questions that we can ask. Please ask, well, what data was your AI trained on? How many data cases, how many use cases were included in that training set? What is the quantity and what is the quality? What variables were included in the training? How many different variables were you able to provide rather than if the only box that you checked was, is the character a celebrity or non-celebrity? That's 2 variables and probably likely not nearly enough to be able to predict a wide range of human behaviors or reactions. What do the validations look like? Make sure at all times as a researcher in these conversations, you ask, what validations does your organization provide? So I can make sure that this is actually predictive and tied to in-market sales. And also, can the AI provider really show you examples of what a pilot study looks like and provide side-by-side results so you can compare what it would be like to test with 150 people versus the AI machine. Again, AI tends to be faster, cheaper. Talking to real people and getting them to really provide reactions can be more expensive and slower. I'm now going to talk to you about diversity and inclusion. And diversity and inclusion is a topic that you're not, well, I would hope that you don't want to avoid, but you're not going to avoid it. It is, the world has massively changed. And we know, based on everything that's happened in the past 20 years, but also the past 3 years, that this is a topic that we absolutely need to pay the right amount of attention. If you don't bake it into your plan, you will be called out at some point, and usually with it, you'll be called out with the kind of communication that you're putting out into the world. What we know from, and there's a set of data that came from This happened to actually come from the organization that I work for at Ipsos, but what we found is that almost 80%, almost 8 in 10 of the people surveyed said that they absolutely do not want anything to happen based on how things happened before COVID-19. They want the world to change significantly and become far more sustainable and equitable. So not only is it the right thing for us to care about, even if they didn't, almost 80% of the people are saying, if you don't pay attention to these things and change, we will not actually be attracted to your brand, and we will not be brand loyal. What we can see is that 50% of people said that they would stop using a brand if its stance on equality did not align with their own. And even more people within the 18 to 34-year-old demographic and Hispanics and households with kids. Everybody is saying that I would stop using a brand if you're not paying attention to the way that I want you to help change the world. 35% of the people surveyed said that they would be more likely to purchase from a company that really took a public stand against racism. That's even higher with African Americans, Asians, and 18 to 34-year-olds. Also, what we can see is that DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, also can no longer be ignored. The world has absolutely changed, and we need to change along with it. So please, if you want to be relevant, you need to figure out how the methodologies and the research that you bring in can make sure that something is not just aspirational, but it is also authentic, and it absolutely will not be effective if it is not authentic and if it is not based in the root of what people actually believe to be the right way to move forward in the world. Everything that used to be sort of avoided and kind of looked the other way, don't ask, don't tell, the world is now saying we want to represent ourselves across all of the groups and don't leave anybody behind. Now let's talk about if you are going to help test or help pick a creative research partner, how you can actually pick the right one. What we do know is that it's really important to think about the very beginning of the process to pick them is really about, as a researcher, just like you want to ask the right questions of the people you will do research on, you want to be able to ask the right questions to pick the right research partner. So if you're thinking about how to pick that partner, you want to make sure that they can rise to the occasion in which you need them to. You need to be able to bring that kind of rigor to be able to select the best partner. And whether or not you're going to actually create a request for a proposal, you do want to think about some basic considerations when you begin your process. So let's think about methodology. Can they explain their methodologies in a way that's really intuitive and a way for you to easily understand, especially since you're going to have to explain it to your key stakeholders? Are these black box and you're never going to truly understand what goes into it? You have to trust them. Or are their tools really transparent and intuitive? How have their methodologies been validated? Validation is incredibly important to understand what are the investments they've made in not only stating that their methodologies are valid, but how have they actually proven that they are validated to in-market performance? Can they actually show you those results from the validations? And do they have data scientists in-house who are always ensuring that the predictive measures are meaningful and relevant? When we also think about their methodology, what kind of norms and data lakes do they have? How do they manage their database? What are the measures included in their database? How do they stay relevant and current? What quality controls do they put in place? And how finely can the database be cut while still maintaining that robustness and the number of normative cases that we need them to have? What kind of sampling design are they going to help you figure out how to bring the right amount of rigor? How do they approach that design and manage it when they really design the sample for your study? Does their methodology sample are they designing at just the category level? Is it about general population, Gen Pop, or can they really sample based on a custom basis? It's also important to note that their sampling is really likely related to how they collected their normative data and how they are designing their norms for you, and what practices are in place that really will ensure that you don't have to worry about being the person who's actually going to get in and manage the quality. Let's talk about service and partnership. How are they going to staff your client service team? Are you going to have a full service team? Are they going to have people with a lot of expertise, or are these people who just started? Who are the people that you're going to interact with on a daily basis? What is their experience? You have the right to ask all of these things. Do they have a full suite of brand and researcher experts? Are they people who fill out a deep bench of talent in order to make sure that you understand how this is all connected to brand and not just an execution? How are you going to be advised about all of the things, or do you have to go outside their organization if you need to have somebody who has the chops to be able to talk about how it's all connected? Are they going to help you explain the full story? Are they going to just hand you a report? Are they going to be able to help you craft that story and make sure that they're not just explaining the metrics on the page, but are they going to explain the metrics that matter, why they matter, and beyond? Also, are they the kind of storytellers that will really bring those rich insights and recommendations that you want, or are they just going to hand you data and say good luck? Also important is think about their reputation. Can they provide you references? Let's ask them specifically, who is happy and how can I talk to them or see the story that they might already have told in order to make sure that they are advocating for them as an actual partner? What kind of thought leadership do they have? Are they really actively contributing to the advertising and research communities that have great skin in the game? And also, are they published? And finally, what kinds of industry memberships do they have? This can be really important to understand. Do they belong to the organizations that prove that they have a commitment to this industry? Are they actively participating? And are they also endorsed or monitored by other industry experts? So now let's talk about some of the leading creative testing research firms. They really do tend to fall into one of three buckets: survey-based, in-market testing, and do-it-yourself. There are tons of of suppliers, approaches, and philosophies across this industry, and really they will provide a great different set of abilities to be able to fulfill all of the needs of marketers and agencies across this industry. Um, so next, the approaches really are generally, but not always, they will fit into one of these categories: survey-based pre-testing, in-market testing, and do-it-yourself. Survey-based pre-testing really helps test ads in well-developed sort of proprietary systems that predict the effectiveness of the advertising creative. And this is all based on surveys. It is proprietary. It tends to be very different depending on who you work with. And it's all about predicting the effectiveness of advertising, of the creative, and often really comparing it to normative databases. Despite a lot of the similarity of their outputs, each system really does maintain a unique philosophical approach and method. And these systems tend to be, and hopefully you will get proof that they are validated to actual in-market performance because they have done research on research, and they can prove over the course of years that they have the effective use of R&D. They also will usually provide some version of these key creative testing metrics and giving you the opinion as to how they will predict an ad's ability to break through, to connect back to the brand, to clearly communicate a message, and to also persuade to some kind of change in behavior or belief about the brand or a product. Also, in Module 7, we will talk about that much more. Also, the diagnostic measures that they have to really explain those metrics and to be able to provide that guidance to help optimize. Marketers will usually lock into one of these systems for all of their creative testing. They usually don't hop around. They will usually purchase one kind of set of methodologies so that over time they don't have to constantly switch. And usually it will kind of link back at least to brand tracking and also the ability to educate and train their teams. Some providers really will combine survey and neuroscience methods, and that's important to find out if they're doing that. And the largest of these providers tend to include Ameritest, which is also part of Dynata. There's a company called Forethought. There's one called Holland Partners. There's one called Ipsos, which is the one, again, that I'm working for currently. Kantar, which I've also worked for and also formerly was called Millward Brown. Very important to remember those two are linked because Millward Brown has a ton of history in this space. Kantar is the company that now owns them. There's MSW Research, there's Nielsen, and there's also a company called System One. When we talk about in-market testing methods and assessing the effectiveness of ads once they actually are launched, this really tends to help all of the users of this method to see how their own and competitive ads are performing simultaneously. So in market, we can see that these syndicated data services, which are also proprietary, will provide the kinds of analytics that really are about the impact of the creative film and videos, specifically that are in market once the campaign has launched. They collect both qualitative and quantitative measures through a pretty brief survey, and marketers will often track their own and their competitive creative through that system, providing the ability to compare their own to competitors in a real world setting. And Ace Metrics is the largest provider of this method. There's also a lot of DIY systems out there that allow the marketers and agencies to sort of control how often, how frequently, and at what stage they're going to bring in some research to be able to help optimize. And these DIY systems tend to be templated survey-based systems that definitely help different marketers test their own creative without engaging a research supplier to conduct that test. The focus of these systems is usually about speed, staying really efficient with your cost, and the ability to iterate across different studies in order to be able to optimize. And this is really appealing to clients and users in the world of being really agile and being controlled with their solutions. And these systems tend to allow for a much simpler kind of test at the stages of in between the broad phases of creative development, kind of just like a quick hit of research to really quickly assess what consumer response is to the ideas in progress. And these kinds of companies tend to include Qualtrics, Kantar Marketplace, Momentive, and Zappy. Pretty much all systems will have some kind of DIY. I have tend to found that most clients who especially have larger budgets tend to not want to depend on DIY for the majority of their research, but there are some who are getting more and more savvy as time goes on. And now for the final part of this presentation is a subject that we could talk about endlessly because there is so much of an art to how we approach the science of our careers in this ecosystem of brand building, and that is as storytellers. Storytelling is something that if you find a person who's really good at it, you will find yourself transfixed in the same way that you will going to listen to one of the great orators of the century. You will find that the way that they bring the flow to all of the information and building the excitement to a crescendo, or perhaps starting with the crescendo and making sure that people understand why it is the only thing to be taken away from a presentation. You will find that those people have such a gift, and just to be inspired by them can help us bring some more magic to our own craft. So even though this could take, like I said, hours, I will try to make sure that I understand just how to get storytelling on your radar and to make sure that we give you just enough to be able to understand how quickly you can improve a presentation to move your audience if you think about just a few things. When you're thinking about telling a story to the people that you're trying to move or persuade to take a certain action, there really isn't a lot of difference between how you expect to do that with branded content versus your own story as a researcher. So there really is a way to think about our presentations with almost the exact same way that a story arc would move our audience. We have the need for a very beginning with an inciting incident. We have a middle where we want to bring some rising action to gain more attention and bring people to the climax of the story. And then we will have a little bit of kind of a falling away, the kind of action where we bring people to the end of the ride in order to make sure that they understand why the resolution is really the end point of the game, and to be able to get people to remember how we want them to act really is much better with that same kind of a flow, the beginning and the middle of the end. So really do think about how you can bring that kind of a flow to your presentation in order to make sure that your audience is engaged with you at every single step of the way. The key kind of sections that you'll want to think about as you're telling your story are really pretty predictable, but there is the background. What was really the need that led to this project? What was the methodology? What was done? How did we do it? Who was it done with? Who were the respondents? How many of them? Where and when was it done? Who conducted it? And what was the actual stimulus that we used in order to conduct our research? What were the detailed key findings? Make sure that you're laying out everything that you learned and how that is pertinent to these research objectives and learnings. It should really support your conclusions and your summary. And all of the findings should really address the business issues that you've been charged in helping to solve. There should be a very strong conclusion and summary. We want to make sure what was the big picture answer, kind of that elevator summary. I'm sure we've all been asked to give elevator pitches so that we can make it succinct and help people really understand what it is that we want them to do once they get off on the floor that the ride was taking them to. And also to make sure that the recommendations are really clear. What should the client do? Or what should your stakeholders do as a result of this research in order to really move their business? We also want to make sure that we have an appendix, because there's going to be so much data that we do not want to beat people over the heads with. Let's make sure that any of the additional supporting data that somebody could ask for later, when they think about, God, what about that? And then we can say, thought of that, it's in the appendix. How we help unfold the story, there's really two different ways, and it's really about understanding first, seeking to understand before being understood. Who is your audience, and what do we think they will want to hear? There's two different ways to do this. There's the convergent style. The convergent style is really typical. We lead with the detailed key findings, we take them through to the conclusions, and we build to the recommendations. And this convergent style is really good when, and it is a better choice when we're presenting to the researchers as clients, or really someone who might need to represent this data and advocate for all the findings inside their organization. But then there's a different group that we can predict will really be more helped and more persuaded by giving them the deductive style. And this group of people tends to be a very senior group, and they usually have kind of a C letter next to their name. So the CMOs, the CEOs, anybody who's really, their time is considered a little bit more precious than other people's. It's not that they're more important, but they have a lot more to weed through. And getting them to be an advocate, we want to jump immediately to the conclusions. And these kinds of people are not going to really love to live in the weeds. So we want to start off with our conclusions. What exactly is it that we have found is the best path to take? Based on the conclusions and the recommendations that we have developed, and also to make sure that the detailed key findings are really there for supporting points, making sure that we bake in just enough in case they have questions about, well, how did you get to that? But it really needs to be deducing for them, starting with the conclusions rather than building up to them. We can really learn a lot about research storytelling specifically when we look for it, because there are many people who have made this into an incredibly impressive career. And in the Harvard Business Review, there's something about the 4 truths of storytelling, and Peter Guber is the man who designed this. There is the teller way of unfolding a story, And again, I should have started by saying this is also really informed by how the movie industry tells stories. So there's the teller, and this is about, well, what do we know and what have we learned about the brand that is really pertinent to the ad being tested? So this is taking the perspective of the teller. Then we've got the perspective of the audience. What do we know and what have we learned about the audience to whom we're looking to influence with our ad? So this is really taking the perspective of telling the story through the audience lens. The next one is all about focusing on the mission. What are we trying to achieve with the ad? What do we want our audience to come away with? And how do we make sure that we focus on that big mission and making sure that we tell our audience and bring them along the journey of how we're succeeding with that mission? The final is all about the moment. And this is one that not many people really often take the perspective from. This is really about what's happening in the culture and in our world, or maybe in our category, that might really bring some impact as to how the ad is going to be perceived. And making sure that we understand how those four truths within storytelling can really help impact and bring that kind of interest and make people feel really engaged throughout the entire process of how you got to the recommendations and how you would like your audience to see the world once they're done interacting with this presentation. So here's some thoughts when we're really thinking about storytelling, specifically around the research results. Uh, so within research, we tend to think there is not going to be anything exciting because this, after all, is just about giving people the data and landing the recommendations. Um, so sometimes the data or methodology really can determine that story sequence and flow. But what we really need to make sure is that we're leading with the business issues. And we really need to make sure that we focus on how the findings are going to be used to help dictate the story. It's going to be really hard for you to not be addicted to loving your own data and the methods, because after all, you're so passionate about what you're doing and everybody else should be as well. But that's not going to be the way the world is going to meet you. They're not always going to be enthusiastic about the data. They might see how enamored we are and they might really appreciate that. But honestly, they're going to get bored really fast if that's all you do is focus on the data. We want to make sure that we work to simplify the data. You're not going to beat somebody into submission with the data. The more you bore them, the longer you go on, the less they might be listening. Please don't get trapped by feeling like you're only confined to the data that you have exactly found on your own. We want to make sure that you're using all kinds of things to string together relevant and pertinent arcs of the story based on all of the ways that we can observe that the world might be interacting around the business issues with which you're trying to solve. So think about, are there really factors outside of this research specifically that we might be able to bring in to subsidize the story? Or is there some recent competitive activity? Do we have any major related cultural happenings around us right now? Are there other relevant research findings that other corporations have found, other things that will help really validate and vet where we're trying to lead people? These are the kinds of things that can really help your findings and recommendations come across much more relevant and impactful and powerful. So some other things to think about are, how can we focus on the insights over information? Every creative test is going to really generate a lot of information, but not everybody is going to have, and quite frankly, it shouldn't be their job to interrogate every bit of data and findings that you have. We want to make sure that we really are focusing them in on the things that we want them to learn that are new and unexpected, and how really it can be motivational once they've understood at the basic or at the base level of how that ad is working, how the audience is reacting to it. And specifically, we want people to have the energy to focus on how it can be app optimized in order to be even more impactful and really help achieve the business objectives. We really want them to be able to feel that this is resonating with them at a very deep and human level. In other words, we don't want to focus on the information, we want to focus on that insight. So really think about challenging yourself over the course of your career. How can you explain more than just the research results that you're seeing? how can you explain why you're seeing these and make sure that people have those moments of, I wouldn't have seen that unless this researcher had really done that deep thinking for me in order to open my mind to a new possibility. Let's think about perhaps creating your presentation almost like a script. Script writers tend to use these 3-act or 5-act structures, which really offers up this very nice way to have a form that is flowing in order to really deliver a story. Again, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Really think about your data and how to organize it in sort of those 3 or 5 key events, conflicts or challenges that really come out of that. Who's your protagonist? Does your story have a heroine or a villain that the audience can relate to? Can you tell the story about these things with creating characters out of what the challenges are or the things that you're trying to overcome and solve in the world in which you guys are competing? Where in your narrative is there really kind of a pivot to the story? How can we make a turn where we create that really strong energy to make people feel like this is going to be the hero and solve the day, or oh my gosh, this is really dramatizing the villain, so I can see how we absolutely want to make sure that we can thwart their efforts and come out smelling even more like a rose. Here's something to think about. It is really frustrating to understand that there's a lot of times that people are just not incorporating the creative brief into the story, the overall story of what we were trying to do here, and whether or not it is the client who doesn't know how to get a hold of one, or whether it's the researcher that doesn't know to ask for it. Get really familiar with truly who in the organization really wants to make sure that this is deeply rooted in all of the hard work that has been done to get you to where you are. There is usually somebody, if you don't take no for an answer, there's usually somebody who will absolutely find a way to break down the doors that they need to in order to get you that creative brief. If you don't, if somebody tells you to stop asking, that's a different story, but at least have objectives that are agreed upon in which to tell the story of how the data is illuminating the path to the right answer. Uh, Here's another way to think about it. Start by writing down your final recommendations. Start by writing down, here is where I believe that we're going to take people into making it easier to understand the ad, or helping develop a different kind of character so that we don't have that hurdle of a character that nobody relates to and quite frankly doesn't want to see win the war in which we're engaged. So if you start by writing those things down and you really think about the 3 or 4 main arguments that really support that recommendation, we need to do this because because, and because. If we can make sure that we're a step ahead of the people who might be thinking through what is the most logical uh, way that they're going to try to debate you and say, well, maybe that isn't right. Let's figure out how we can have these 3 really critical 3 or 4 pieces of thinking that will stop people in their tracks. Let's make sure that we use the data as the proof and not just our opinions. And finally, let's make sure that you find your voice. There's an old saying in the industry that is find your voice and change your world. So if you find your voice in the way that you will be differentiated, it will be much easier for you to stay true to that and give yourself the permission to just be exactly who you are and to work with the skills and the strengths that you have. So you can find your voice by really thinking, well, who is my audience? Who do I want to move? Do these findings really demand an authoritative voice? Is my audience really just looking for inspiration? And also, do you have to sell the story, or are people already there to buy the story and just want permission to buy into it and believe in it even more than they already do? Now, let's also talk about how to think about this almost like being an attorney who's arguing a case, except for rather than evidence or exhibits, you really have your data. It's not going to be that different for you to think about how to persuade an audience differently than a really skilled lawyer would. So let's also think about what it could be helpful for you to actually make a study or to study how different attorneys lead their audience through the argument with the different kinds of points that they have to make. Just watch how they summarize that case. And they do present the evidence, but they really more so tell a story in which a human being can buy into something because they're sitting on the edge of their seat and they're ready to buy into what has just been given to them as a construct for which to believe. The story really is the star, not the evidence and not the data. It's the story. And people will understand that the data is the permission to nod at that story. And also, it really is about getting the jury or the audience's attention, the story again, and not the actual evidence. It's really important also to think about the elegance of simplicity. And Giorgio Armani, a famous designer, I'm sure that you know Armani, or you've at least heard of Giorgio, and it really is all about that simplicity is so elegant, and confusion and constantly trying to build up to something with more and more and more tends to really start to have diminishing returns. So when we think about simplicity and clarity in telling your story, and I don't think anybody will argue that simplicity and clarity are great strengths of storytellers, we want to make sure that we understand that when we present data, people can really become or be overcome with numbers. They can actually just start to get bored and tune out, and your job is to really make the presentation of the data as simple as possible so that we don't create cognitive overload. In the same way that we don't want to give people 100 reasons why to believe in our product and our brand, we want to make sure that people can just latch on to maybe just a couple or a few things in order to buy into the way that this brand or the product sees the world. And when you think about simplicity, I love this graph or this idea, which is the simplest solutions really are often the cleverest. So if I'm telling people to find X, it's as simple as here it is. It's that funny, or it's that simple. Also, if we want to, we can think about how much we can learn from tautology and also Occam's razor. Tautology is really about unnecessarily and absolutely with lack of importance, getting people to be beaten over the head with constant repetition of meaning using about 800 different ways to make the same point. So I love this image where we're beating people over the heads with all kinds of details about what these different ways are to buy into this new razor. We just want to make sure that we're not saying something, the same thing twice. We want to bring unique and inspirational information and data that can breathe. Occam's razor, when you have two competing theories that make exactly the same predictions, the simpler one is the better. It's just about making sure that we make it easy for people to understand how to get from one place to the other. There's also a famous saying that is, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. We want to make sure that people easily understand how I got from there to there and make it feel simple and elegant. And by really avoiding tautology and making sure that we adhere to Occam's razor, it's surely going to bring you to a more engaging story. So that is it for this module. And I will see you in module 7, where we talk about what makes for a really great ad.